Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Legal Gym podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today, where we're going to be talking about should you actually form an LLC for your online business. For the show notes for today's episode, which will include all of the links and resources for everything that I'm going to be discussing today, make sure to head on over to hawthornelaw.net/15. That's hawthornelaw.net/15. And let's go ahead and dive into today's episode. Now, before we get into the amazing content for today's episode, I wanted to let you know about a new training that I'm working on. I'll be teaching my 4R filing framework to get your trademarks registered quickly and easily. In addition, I'm going to be sharing the top 3 mistakes I see online entrepreneurs make that can sabotage their brand and even force them into bankruptcy. So if you want to sleep better at night knowing that your brand is protected, you don't want to miss this free training. Just head on over to hawthornelaw.net/trademark to get notified when the training is live. Once again, that's hawthornelaw.net/trademark, and everyone who attends this training is going to get a free gift from me. And if you're an entrepreneur who is building a brand online, this is one training you definitely don't want to miss. So one last time, go to hawthornelaw.net/trademark to get signed up for the notification list today. All right, today we've got a lot to cover, but I'm going to try and make it as easy and entertaining as I can, because I know LLCs are anything but entertaining. But today, some of the things we're going to cover is what is an LLC? Why is forming an LLC important to your online business? Should you form an LLC before you trademark your name? We're going to talk about that a little bit. And then lastly, what I recommend in terms of should or should you not form an LLC when you are just getting started with your online business. So let's jump into it today. Let's start with what is an LLC? An LLC stands for Limited Liability Company. These started back in Wyoming. I think it was Wyoming back in the 70s. And they are a creature of state law. Now, back when LLCs were started, we had corporations and we had basically partnerships or sole proprietorships on the other hand. So the only real business entity that you could form by registering something with the state was a corporation. But corporations have some inherent problems. There's a lot of technical nuance to them. There's a lot of legal requirements to make sure that the corporation is maintained properly, and they're just clunky, and there's a lot that goes into setting up a corporation. And when you're a sole proprietor, you need to be somewhat fluid with how you're doing business. So an LLC was created to kind of bridge that gap between the corporate entity. It gives you the limited liability protection that you would get with a corporation, but also gives you the ease of management that you get from being your own sole proprietor. So an LLC, as a limited liability company, started as state law, gives you that limited liability protection. The other thing it gives you that a lot of people don't talk about is some tax benefits. And I'm going to talk more about that here in just a minute. But a lot of people don't talk about the tax benefits. They'll say, well, when you form an LLC, you're not actually getting any tax benefits. And that in and of itself is correct, but it's also not correct. And I'm going to talk about that here. So let's talk about why forming an LLC is important. And those tax benefits are one of those important reasons. But before we get to that, I think that the most important reason that you can set up an LLC, or that you should set up an LLC for your online business, is because of the mental shift that happens when you form that limited liability company. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that a lot of people, they start their online business and they just kind of deposit whatever, measly earnings they make from the business, they deposit into their personal checking account, and they look at it as a side hustle, and they treat it as a side hustle. And when you treat it as a side hustle as opposed to a legitimate business, you're going to be kind of limited in how much your business is actually going to grow, because it's going to be considered a hobby for you and not a legitimate business. What happens, and what I've seen from people time and time again, is that once they take the affirmative step of going ahead and forming an LLC for their side hustle, it creates this mental shift in their brain where they are looking at this as, oh, this is its own legal entity. This is something that's separate and apart from me. This is something that I need to nurture and build and grow. And this is how that starts to happen. It starts with forming that LLC. So not only does it give you a mental shift, it's going to separate you as a person from your business as an entity. And that's really important in terms of the limited liability that you get from forming a limited liability company. So what that means is as your business grows and you deal with more customers and clients, there's an increased likelihood that at some point somebody might sue you. Again, the likelihood of this happening is small, but it happens every single day. And so having that limited liability company shell in place, provided that you're operating it correctly, is going to protect you personally from the debts of your business. And what a lot of people miss when it comes to limited liability companies is it also protects the business itself from your personal debts. So if you're driving down the street and you hit somebody with your car and they sue you, then they needed to get more coverage from you, could go after all of your assets. And your shares in a corporation that you might own, if you were a corporate entity, would be something that they could get. They could get all your shares in that company, and they can come in the back door and sell, basically take over your business and sell all the stuff from your business. With a limited liability company, all they can get is something that's called a charging order, which is different in every state, and that limits what they can actually do in terms of taking over your limited liability company. So the nice thing, I don't want to go too much into the weeds here, but what you need to understand is that limited liability runs two ways. So it's going to protect your business from your personal debts, and it's going to protect your personal assets from your business debts. So that's another huge benefit of forming that limited liability company. And then, of course, the last benefit, as I mentioned before, is the tax benefits. Now, yes, when you file that LLC, there are not technically any tax benefits that come from forming that LLC. But what you do get that you don't get as a sole proprietor is you get the option to tell the IRS how you want that business to be taxed. So you could continue to be taxed as a sole proprietor. You could be taxed as a C corporation, which means that you would file your own separate tax return and pay your own separate taxes for that limited liability company. Or you can ask the IRS to file as an S election. And there's some really great, cool benefits that come from filing that S election, but you can only do that if you're a limited liability company. You cannot be a sole proprietor and form an S election. So that's where the tax benefits really come into play. It's the fact that you can tell the IRS how you want to be taxed now, and you can elect the best tax status for your personal situation, as opposed to a sole proprietor, where you just get taxed as a sole proprietor, which comes with heavy self-employment taxes and things like that. So there's some differences there. So this is why having an LLC is important. Which leads to the next thing that I want to talk about today is, should you form an LLC before you trademark your brand name? So I've talked in previous episodes why it is so important, and it's one of the biggest mistakes that online entrepreneurs make is not actually registering the names of their trademarks with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. And I think this is a vitally important thing that you need to do. So the question becomes, when you file that trademark application, you have to list the owner of the trademark. Now, the owner of the trademark can be a sole proprietor, so it could be you personally, it could be a partnership, it could be an LLC, it could be a C corporation. The question is, do you file that LLC so that the LLC owns the trademarks, the intellectual property for your business, or do you file as a sole proprietor before you've actually filed that LLC? Now, I want you to understand that you can you can register your trademarks with you listed as a sole proprietor and owner of the trademark. That is perfectly fine. You can do that. But if later on down the road you decide to form an LLC for your business, then you have to update the filing with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and that is typically done by filing an assignment. It's not a terribly complicated procedure, but it is something that needs to be done, and you're probably going to need to hire a lawyer to help you with that to make sure it gets done properly. Personally, listen, this is not legal advice. Nothing I say here on this podcast is legal advice, but I think, in my personal belief, it is easier and simpler to have that LLC in place at the very beginning. But again, it's not necessary. So you can do whatever works in your situation. But personally, I feel like having it in place at the beginning and then filing your trademark application is just an easier way to go about it. It's going to be less complicated later on down the road. And so what do I recommend? I do recommend that you should form your LLC before, at least before you register your trademark. But also, I think that it's important to register that LLC when you're just getting started with your business. And some of the reasons for that, again, that mental shift that goes on when you actually form that LLC. Also, and I haven't talked about this a whole lot, it's so much easier to set up your LLC when you're just getting started than to wait until you start getting a lot of sales and then 6 or 9 months down the road and you're like, oh shoot, I need to set up that LLC. Well, now all of a sudden you need to set up new bank accounts. You need to get a new EIN number for the LLC. You need to switch over all your Stripe and PayPal accounts. You need to set up new QuickBooks accounts if you're using QuickBooks for your business, which I recommend. So that is a lot of work. A lot goes into switching this from a sole proprietor over to an LLC. It's just easier to start it off from the beginning when you don't have any sales coming in. Set it all up properly at the very beginning, and it's just an easier way to do it. And then also the other main reason is, so a lot of people say, well, can't I just file that S Corp election when I'm making enough money for that to make sense? And I'll do that, and I'll do the LLC at the same time. That's fine, you can do that, but the LLC is not retroactive. So if you start the year as a sole proprietor on January 1st, and then you go to June and you say, you know what, things are going well this year, I think we should take advantage of that S election rule. So you go ahead and let's say, on August 31st, you file your LLC and set up that S Corp because you made a bunch of money at the beginning of the year. Well, that S Corp election is only retroactive to the date that you filed your LLC. It's not retroactive to January 1st. But on the other hand, if you start the year on January 1st and you're already an LLC, and you're waiting to see how you do to see if you want to make that S Corp election, then if by June you say, you know what, things are going well with the business, I think we should take advantage of that S Corp election this year, you can file that paperwork and it goes retroactive back to January 1st. That's another major financial benefit of having that LLC in place, is that you know that you can take advantage of that S Corp election retroactively to when you filed your LLC. So for all these reasons, I think it's clear. My recommendation here is that you should set up an LLC as soon as possible. Obviously, if you've got any questions, then you want to talk to a lawyer about this. Nothing I say on this podcast should be considered legal advice, but these are important things that you need to be thinking about. And I do recommend considering getting that LLC set up as quickly as you can when you start your online business. All right, all you Legal Gym listeners, now that you know more about whether you should form an LLC for your online business and when you should form that LLC, you are ready to implement, because if there's one thing we love to do here at the Legal Gym, it's to take action. So if you haven't already, make sure to check out the show notes page for today's episode. You can get a rundown of all the links and resources that we talked about here by visiting hawthornelaw.net/15. That's hawthornelaw.net/15. That's going to be the home base for all of your legal and business tools and resources to help you start, build, and yes, legally protect your online business. Thank you so much for listening today. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.